The version of your life that almost happened. Carl Jung observed that the life you did not choose does not disappear when you close that door. It moves house, from the world into the psyche, and it waits there, patiently, the way a room waits for furniture. Goethe wrote, in Faust, "Two souls alas dwell within my breast," and Jung returned to that line again and again across his working life, because he saw in it a plain description of a plain fact, that inside every one of us there are at least two claims on our living, one that took the road and one that did not. And Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The second soul does not die simply because you did not feed it. It goes on breathing somewhere beneath the floor of your ordinary days. It is not a fantasy you indulge on a slow Sunday. It is a portion of your own psychic material, still alive, still unspent. And this is why the old photograph, the old lover's name, the old city you did not move to, can still reach up out of nowhere and take the breath out of you at 40, at 50, at 60. It is not nostalgia, it is a second soul asking to be recognized. If you have ever sat in a perfectly good life and felt a strange, specific grief, not for anything you can name, but for a shape your life might have taken, you are not broken, and you are not alone in this. Jung treated this exact ache in people who by every outward measure had nothing to complain of. And he did not tell them to be grateful, he told them to look closer. So let us do that now, together, quietly. Before we go further, I say to myself, I stop treating the life that almost happened as a wound to hide from. I let myself see it as unspent material still belonging to me. I choose to integrate what it offers, instead of mourning what it took. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, slower this time. I make the unconscious conscious. I would love for tomorrow's teaching to find you too. So if this is speaking to something real in you, consider staying close by subscribing. Quietly. No fuss. Just so the next fire is easy to find. If something in you just went quiet while I said that, God has given you one face, and you make yourself another. Face it. Let that be the small seal on what we're about to open together. The first key is this. The version of your life that almost happened was never a different person. It was you, untaken. Jung taught that individuation, the slow becoming of a whole self, depends on recognizing that everything you might have been is still, in some form, made of the same psychic stuff you are made of now. Not a stranger's life, not a parallel person living somewhere else, but your own unused capacities, your own untried courage, your own quieter talents, still folded up inside you like a coat you never wore. You did not fail to become someone else. You simply left parts of yourself in the closet, and Jung wrote that we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning, meaning the choices that made sense for the person you were at 22 are not obligated to keep governing the person you are now. The road not taken was not a rejection of you. It was a chapter of you postponed, not erased. And once you see it this way, the grief softens just slightly, because you are not mourning a stranger's happiness. You are recognizing a piece of your own house you have not entered in years. Imagine, for a moment, a man in his 50s, cleaning out a garage on an ordinary Saturday, who finds a box of old cassette tapes from a band he played bass in his 20s. A band that almost signed with a small label before he took the safer job instead. He does not weep because he wishes he were famous. He sits on the cold concrete floor and feels something closer to homesickness. A homesickness for a version of himself that used to stay up until 3 in the morning chasing a chord change. That self did not vanish when he took the job. It went quiet. It moved into the back rooms of him and waited. And this is the plain truth Jung kept returning patients to. That self is not gone. It is simply unfurnished. Notice too how differently this feels once you stop calling it regret. Regret says you chose wrong. Recognition says only that a room in you has sat empty a long while, and an empty room is not a verdict on the rest of the house. It is only a room, waiting for you to remember you still hold the key to it, so when the old photograph surfaces, or the old friend's name appears in your feed, or the cassette tape turns up in a box you nearly threw away, you do not have to flinch from it as if it were an accusation. You can let it sit beside you instead, quietly, the way you would let an old friend sit beside you at a fire. Because that is closer to what it actually is. I stop grieving a stranger and start recognizing myself. The second key is this. The ache you feel is not for the other life. It is for the parts of yourself that life would have required you to use. Notice the difference, because it changes everything. When you see an old classmate who became the traveling photographer, the ache is rarely about airports and cameras. It is about the boldness that path would have demanded of you, the risk-taking muscle you never had to build because you chose the steadier road. When you see the one who stayed in the small town and raised the big warm family, the ache is not about that particular house. It is about the patience and rootedness that life would have asked of you. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of envy as one of the most honest maps we have. Envy tells you exactly which capacities in yourself are still sitting unused, waiting for the summons. So the question is, never should I have taken that road. The question is, what quality did that road ask for? That this road never had to ask of me, and could I, even now, in this life, in this house, in this marriage, in this job, find one modest way to let that same quality breathe. You do not need the other life to access the other soul. You need only stop assuming the two are sealed apart. Look closer at how this actually moves through an ordinary week, and you will start to see it everywhere once you know what you are looking for. Imagine a woman scrolling through a friend's photographs from a semester abroad she once considered and declined, and feels a small hot flash of something she quickly calls disapproval. Too impractical, too irresponsible, she tells herself. But sit with that word disapproval a moment longer, and it thins out. Underneath it is not judgment at all. It is longing, not for the specific city in the photographs, but for the freedom to be uncertain in public, the willingness to not have a plan, a willingness her own carefully managed life has never once required of her. And once she can name it that plainly, the sting in her chest changes character entirely. It stops being about her friend and starts being a small, honest report on herself. Imagine now a man who watches his brother start a small business every few years, always failing, always starting again, and each time he feels a flash of something sharp and uncomfortable that he calls concern, but is really envy, not for the business itself. He has no wish to lose money on a food truck or a hardware store. What he envies is the willingness to be wrong in public, the stomach for risk his own steady salaried life never asked him to build. And once he sees this clearly, the envy stops pointing outward at his brother and starts pointing inward at himself, at the one small risk he has been avoiding in his own quiet corner of life. A conversation he has not had, an idea he has not tried, a room he has not opened. This is the real use of envy. Not as a verdict on your character, but as a compass reading, telling you plainly which room in your own house has gone unvisited. And once you learn to read it this way, even a passing sting of envy at a stranger's life becomes useful, becomes almost kind, because it stops asking you to become them, and starts asking you to become a little more of yourself. Pause for a moment and pick one real person whose life has quietly irritated or moved you this year, and ask only what quality of theirs you are actually responding to, not their house, not their luck, the quality underneath it. I stop envying the road and start reclaiming the quality it asked for. The third key is this: every unlived possibility keeps its own appointment, whether or not you ever wrote it in the book, and it does not ask your permission for the date. Jung knew this from the inside, not only from his patients. In 1913, at the height of his outward success, respected, married, publishing, admired, standing exactly where a man of his training was supposed to stand, he found himself at 38, sitting at his desk unable to work, gripped by a disorientation he could not explain away, and he wrote later in Memories, Dreams, Reflections that he felt he had lost his footing entirely. Noticed that nothing had gone wrong in the visible world. No scandal, no illness, no failure anyone could point to. The sensible outer life was intact and functioning, and still something underneath it had gone silent in a way that frightened him. The life he had built, correct, orderly, fully in line with what was expected of a rising psychiatrist, had simply stopped answering the deeper question underneath it. Some other version of him, quieter, stranger, more symbolic, had been waiting its turn for years, patiently, the way a guest waits in an unlit room, and it would not wait any longer. That collapse became the years of his most dangerous and most important inner work, the descent that produced the Red Book, and here is the part worth sitting with twice. It did not arrive on a day of his choosing. It arrived on its own, at the hour it had already marked, long before he felt ready. Now bring this close to home, because the appointment book does not only open for famous psychiatrists in Zurich. Imagine a woman who at 20 chose the safe accounting degree over the art scholarship because her family needed steadiness, and she gave it to them without complaint. And for 20 years the choice served her well. She built a solid career, raised her children, kept a tidy house, and never once, in any ordinary conversation, would you have guessed she carried an unlived life inside her at all. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, in her 43rd year, doing nothing more dramatic than washing a coffee cup at the sink, she is suddenly and completely undone by grief. For a life of paint and color she never lived. No trigger, no anniversary, no visible cause. Just the cup, the water, and then the flood. This is not regret in the shallow sense. This is not her wishing she had married someone else or lived in another city. This is the unlived life, keeping its appointment precisely on schedule. Arriving not when she summons it, but when the morning program has quietly finished running its course. And here is a second such moment. A man at a nephew's wedding, watching the toast being given by someone who chose the reckless, uncertain path he once considered and declined, feels a wave of something close to shame pass through his chest for no reason he can defend to himself. That too is an appointment kept, not a failure named. Jung would say the sensible choice in each case was not wrong. The sensible choice was simply not the whole of her, not the whole of him. And the part left behind does not forget the date. It does not soften with time the way we assume unattended things soften. It keeps its own calendar entirely apart from your convenience. And it will find you at the sink, at the wedding, in the middle of an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday, precisely because it was never trying to punish you, only to be kept. I stop being surprised when the unlived life knocks, and I open the door, instead of bracing against it. The fourth key is this: the cost of ignoring the unlived life is not punishment, it is atrophy. Nothing dramatic happens at first, no thunderclap, only a slow narrowing. A little less curiosity this year than last, a little more irritability at people who took the road you didn't, a little more flatness in rooms that used to feel alive. Jung wrote that what in the morning was true will at evening have become a lie, and he meant this almost biologically. The psyche is not static furniture, it is a living structure that keeps growing new rooms whether you furnish them or not, and a room left permanently empty does not simply sit there neutral, it grows cold, it grows resentful. In its own quiet way, it starts to leak into the rooms you do use. Picture an ordinary man, a good provider, steady at his desk for 20 years, who once, briefly, in his 20s, wanted to build things with his hands, furniture, boats, anything real and physical. He chose the office instead, because the office paid better, and his family needed that. And for a long while, this was simply a fact about him, not a wound. But somewhere in his 40s, you start to notice him wince at hardware store commercials, snap at his son for taking too long with a school project, go quiet and strange at dinner parties when someone mentions a woodworking hobby. None of this looks like grief. It looks like moodiness. It looks like getting older. But Jung would ask you to look again, because this is exactly what an unused capacity does when it is never even acknowledged. It does not politely fade. It sours. It turns into irritability, into a certain flatness at the edges of an otherwise fine life, into a low, static hum underneath ordinary conversation. This is why so many people at midlife are not undone by some single crisis, but by a slow, accumulating flatness they cannot name. Success that tastes like cardboard, a marriage that is fine but airless, a career that is respected but hollow. None of this means the choices were wrong. It means a second soul has been standing in the hallway for years, unacknowledged, growing colder with every season it is left waiting, and the ordinary politeness we extend to strangers, we have somehow failed to extend to ourselves. I stop letting the unused rooms go cold, and I walk toward them instead of past them. Here is a small pause for something warmer before we go on. If this way of seeing your own life is helping you breathe a little easier, let the channel keep finding you tomorrow by subscribing now. It costs you nothing, and it means the next fire is already lit when you arrive. The fifth key is the deepest one, so let us take it slowly, in 3 parts, because this is the place where most people, meaning well, still get it backwards, and the cost of getting it backwards here is higher than anywhere else in this whole teaching. First, consider that the unlived life is never a summons to go live it literally. And this is the mistake that quietly wrecks marriages and careers somewhere around 45, dressed up as sudden courage, the man who leaves his family overnight because some unlived musician in him has finally found a voice, the woman who empties her savings account, chasing a freedom that a road not taken seemed to promise her in a single golden hour of imagining it. Jung was not gentle about this particular move. He saw it enough times in his consulting room to name it plainly, not as awakening, but as a kind of psychological panic wearing the mask of bravery, because the almost life was never asking to be enacted, point for point in your actual 50-year-old body, with your actual children asleep down the hall, and your actual mortgage due on the 1st of the month. It was asking only to be recognized, and recognition is an entirely different act from replication. Mistaking the two is how a person trades one incompleteness for a more expensive one, and calls it freedom on the way out the door. Imagine a woman of 46, married 2 decades, who once at 19 turned down a chance to move to another country with a man she loved because her own mother was ill and needed her close. She built a good life instead, steady, local, dependable. And one autumn she runs into an old friend who mentions, in passing, that the man eventually settled abroad and still asks after her, and within a month she has convinced herself the marriage she is in is the mistake, that the ache she feels is proof she chose wrong all those years ago. But Jung would ask her to slow down here, because the ache is not proof of a wrong turn, it is only proof of an unused room. And a woman who burns down a steady house to chase the ghost of a door she closed at 19, often finds, a year later, standing in the wreckage, that the ghost was never asking to be married, it was only asking to be remembered. Second, consider how small real integration actually looks, almost embarrassingly small. Nothing like the grand escape the mind first imagines when the ache arrives. Picture an ordinary man, let us say he is 51, who at 23 set aside a half-finished degree in music to take over his father's hardware store, a sensible choice, a loving choice even, and for nearly 30 years it served his family well. And then one evening, closing up the shop, he hears 3 notes drifting from a radio in the back room, and something in his chest drops, as if a floor gave way. This is not a sign that he must sell the store and enroll in a conservatory at 51. Jung would have found that almost comic in its overcorrection. What it actually asks for is far quieter, perhaps an hour on a Sunday with an old keyboard pulled out of a closet, perhaps humming while he counts the register, not to become a professional musician at this late hour, but to let the unused soul breathe on its own modest terms inside the very life he already built. And notice what happens in him over the following months, once he lets those 3 notes back into his evenings, in this small, unthreatening way. The resentment at the shop that had been quietly building for years without a name begins, almost on its own, to soften, not because the shop changed, but because he stopped asking the shop to be the whole of him. This is what individuation looks like, once you strip away the myth of it, not a dramatic overhaul, but a patient, ongoing negotiation between the life that was built and the life that was postponed. Jung called individuation a coming to selfhood, and selfhood is not the self he almost became instead. It is the whole man, made of both the hardware store and the three notes, held together without either one having to destroy the other. This is also the older meaning folded into the word individual, literally undivided. Not a person who chose one road and quietly starved the other to death, but a person who finally arranged for the two roads to stop warring inside one chest. Third, consider what this actually costs, because none of it is free, and Jung never once pretended otherwise. Holding both souls, the one that took the road and the one that did not, means surrendering the comfort of a simple story about your own life. No more saying, "I made the right choice," and that settles the matter forever. No more saying, "I made the wrong choice," and that explains every disappointment since. Instead, you carry something more complicated and more true, that you are the sum of a road taken and a road quietly declined, and that both of them, strange as it sounds, are still yours to answer for. This is uncomfortable in exactly the way real growth is always uncomfortable. It asks you to stop defending your history and start simply owning the whole of it. And there is a particular temptation here worth naming plainly, the temptation to swing between the two extremes. First, pretending the unlived life never mattered at all, dismissing the ache as foolishness or nostalgia. And then, when that pretending fails, swinging hard the other way into the belief that the unlived life is the only true one and the life you built is the fraud. Jung watched people oscillate between these two positions for years without ever landing, because both positions are escapes from the harder work, which is simply to stand in the middle, holding the tension of both claims at once, without collapsing into either. The alternative to this harder standing is the slow flattening we named earlier, stretching on for decades, becoming the silent tax on a life that was never dishonest, only incomplete. So here is a small practice, not a demand, only an invitation. Pause for a moment sometime this week and pick one real fork in your own road, not the largest one, not the one you are most tender about, just one, honestly chosen, and ask only this: what quality did that other path ask of me, that this path rarely asks of me at all? And then ask a second, gentler question: is there one small, unglamorous way I could let that quality visit my actual Tuesday? Not my someday, not my retirement, my actual Tuesday. That is the entire exercise, and it is enough, because Jung was clear that the tension between two claims on a single life is never meant to be resolved by killing one of them off. It is meant to be outgrown by a third thing, quieter than either, that finally honors both. I stop choosing between the roads, and I start becoming the one who can hold them both without breaking. The sixth key is the quiet one, and it is this: the version of your life that almost happened was never asking you to become it. It was asking you to become whole. It did not want your marriage. It did not want your job. It did not want your city. It wanted a hearing, and a hearing is a small thing to finally give it. After all these years of walking past that closed door as though it might bite you, Jung believed the psyche is fundamentally economical. It does not waste its energy demanding what is impossible. It only asks for acknowledgement, for a little honest attention, for the smallest room in the house to be unlocked and aired out now and then. Notice how differently this sits in the body than the earlier ache did. The ache said you are missing something. This key says you are not missing it. You are simply not listening to where it already lives. Imagine a man who wanted, at 19, to teach, to stand in a room and watch understanding cross a young face. And instead he took the position at his father's firm because it paid and it was steady, and nobody in his family had ever been foolish enough to choose meaning over money. For 30 years that old wish said nothing. And then one Saturday, his neighbor's boy knocked, asking for help with algebra, and he sat at his own kitchen table for 40 minutes, explaining fractions. And something in his chest unclenched that he did not know had been clenched. He did not quit the firm. He did not need to. The unlived teacher was never asking for a classroom. It was asking for 40 minutes at a kitchen table. This is what a hearing actually looks like. It is almost embarrassingly small. And that smallness is exactly the proof that it was never about the other life at all. The version of you that almost happened is not your rival, and it is not your judge. It is simply the other half of the same two souls Goethe named so long ago, sitting quietly at the edge of the room, not asking to take over the house, only asking to be let in from the cold once in a while. And the moment you stop treating it as a grief to manage and start treating it as a citizen of your own inner household, something loosens in the chest that has been tight for longer than you knew, longer perhaps than you have been willing to admit even to yourself. I stop mourning the unlived life, and I let it live, in small ways, inside the life I actually have. Here is the whole picture. The road not taken was never a different person. It was you, untaken. The ache you feel for it is really an ache for an unused quality, still yours to reclaim. The unlived life keeps its own appointment, whether you invite it or not. Ignoring it does not erase it. It only lets it go cold and quietly narrow everything else. Integrating it does not mean enacting it. It means giving it small, modest, honest room inside the life you already chose. And in the end, it was never asking to replace your life, only to complete it. 6 keys, and really, only one recognition wearing 6 different coats. That wholeness was never about choosing the right road. It was about refusing to let the other ones starve in the dark. So if somewhere tonight you find yourself thinking of the version of your life that almost happened, do not brace against it the way you might brace against bad news. Let it sit down across from you instead. Let it tell you plainly what it was made of, courage or color or stillness or risk, whatever it was, and then ask yourself gently, not in guilt, not in urgency, only in honest curiosity, where in this actual life, this week, this ordinary Tuesday, could that quality finally be let in? I no longer fear the life that almost happened. I let it teach me instead of haunting me. Again, I let it teach me instead of haunting me. And perhaps that is the real question underneath the title we started with tonight. Not what did I lose by not living it, but what is it still trying to give me, even now, even here, even in this life I already have.